Welcome dear students to lecture 2 of module 5 one-way hash function. In the previous lecture we have learned about MD4. In this lecture we learn about MD5. MD5 is an improved version of MD4. Although more complex than MD4, it is similar in design and also produces a 128-bit hash. Let us see the description of MD5. After some initial processing, MD5 processes the input text in 512-bit blocks divided into 16 32-bit sub-blocks. The output of the algorithm is a set of 4 32-bit blocks which concatenate to form a single 128-bit hash value. First, the message is padded so that its length is just 64 bits short of being a multiple of 512 bits. This padding is a single 1 bit added to the end of the message, followed by as many zeros as are required. Then a 64-bit representation of the message's length is appended to the result. These two steps serve to make the message length an exact multiple of 512 bits in length, while ensuring that different messages will not look same after padding. 4 bits are initialized. 4 32-bit variables are initialized, that is A, B, C and D. These are called the chaining variables. Now the main loop of the algorithm begins. This loop continues for as many 512-bit blocks as are in the message. The 4 variables are copied into different variables. A gets capital A, B gets B, C gets C and D gets D. The main loop has 4 rounds. MD4 had only 3 rounds, all very similar. Each round uses different operation 16 times. Each operation performs a nonlinear function on 3 of A, B, C and D. Then it adds that result to the fourth variable, a sub-block of the text and a constant. Then it rotates that result to the right of a variable number of bits and adds the result to one of A, B, C or D. Finally, the result replaces one of A, B, C or D. Now we'll see the figure of the MD4 blocks. See, you can observe here, these are the initial variables, chaining variables A, B, C, D, and these are the 4 rounds, and this is the message block. Next, you can observe the nonlinear function. These are the small a, b, c, d, where a gets a, b gets b, c gets c, and d gets d. And all the nonlinear function is performed, and then we get it is replaced with the one of these variables. There are 4 nonlinear functions, one used in each operation, a different one for each round. So here you can observe the 4 nonlinear functions. You can observe here f of x comma y comma z equal to x and y, or not of x and of z. You can observe these are the 4 nonlinear functions, and here it is given what does this each symbol mean. Next we'll see the security of MD5. Ron Rivest outlined the improvements of MD5 over MD4. A fourth round has been added. MD4 had only 3 rounds. Each step now has a unique additive constant. The function g in round 2 was changed from x and y or x and z or x, y and z to x and z or y and not of z to make g less symmetric. Each step now adds in the result of the previous step. This promotes a faster avalanche effect. The order in which message subblocks are accessed in rounds 2 and 3 is changed to make these patterns less alike. The left circular shift amounts in each round have been approximately optimized to yield a faster avalanche effect. The 4 shifts used in each round are different from the ones used in other rounds. Next is the secure hash algorithm SHA. NIST along with NSA designed the secure hash algorithm for use with the digital signature standard. This standard specifies a secure hash algorithm which is necessary to ensure the security of the digital signature algorithm. When a message of any length less than 264 bits is input, the SHA produces a 160-bit output called a message digest. The message digest is then input to the DSA, which computes the signature for the message. Signing the message digest rather than the message often improves the efficiency of the process because the message digest is usually much smaller than the message. The same message digest should be obtained by the verifier of the signature when the received version of the message is used as input to the SHA. The SHA is called secure because it is designed to be computationally infeasible to recover a message corresponding to a given message digest or to find different messages which produce the same message digest. Any change to a message in transit will, with a very high probability, result in a different message digest and the signature will fail to verify. SHA produces a 160-bit hash longer than the MD5. Next, let us see the description of SHA. First, the message is padded to make it a multiple of 512 bits long. Padding is exactly the same as in MD5. First, append a 1, then as many zeros as necessary to make it 64 bits short of a multiple of 512, and finally a 64-bit representation of the length of the message before padding. 5 32-bit variables. MD5 has 4 variables, but this algorithm needs to produce a 160-bit hash. So we have take 5 32-bit variables which are initialized as follows. We can see over here A, B, C, D and E. Here first the 5 variables which I have already initialized are copied into these 5 variables here. The main loop has 4 rounds of 20 operation each. Here you can see one such operation over here. Each nonlinear function performs here this nonlinear function operates on three of these A, B, C, D and E and then does shifting and adding similar to the MD5. Now there are 4 constants are used in this algorithm. Now after all this A, B, C, D, E and are added to A, B, capital your A, B, C, D, E respectively and the algorithm continues with the next block of data. The final output is the concatenation of A, B, C, D and E. We'll talk about the security of SHA. SHA is very similar to MD4 but has a 160-bit hash value. The main changes are the addition of an expand transformation and the addition of the previous step's output into the next step for a faster avalanche effect. Here are reverse MD5's improvements to MD4 and how they compare with SHA. First one, a fourth round has been added. SHA does this too. However, in SHA, the fourth round uses same F function as the second round. Second, each step now has a unique additive constant. SHA keeps MD4 scheme where it reuses the constant for each group of 20 rounds. The function g in round 2 was changed from x and y or x and z or y and z to x and z or Y and not of Z to make G less symmetric. SHA uses MD4 version X and Y or X and Z or Y and Z. Fourth one, each step now adds in the result of the previous step. This promotes a faster avalanche effect. This change has been made in SHA as well. The difference in SHA is that a fifth variable is added and not B, C or D, which is already used in the function ft. This subtle change makes the Den-Boer-Boisseliers attack against MD5 impossible against SHA. Fifth one, the order in which message subblocks are accessed in rounds 2 and 3 is changed to make these patterns less alive. SHA is completely different since it uses a cyclic error correcting code. Sixth point, the left circular shift amounts in each round have been approximately optimized to yield a faster avalanche effect. The four shifts used in each round are different from the ones used in other rounds. SHA uses a constant shift in amount in each round. This shift amount is relatively prime to the word size as in MD4. One-way hash functions using symmetric block algorithms. It is possible to use a symmetric block cipher algorithm as a one-way hash function. The idea is that if the block algorithm is secure, then the one-way hash function will also be secure. The most obvious method is to encrypt the message with the algorithm in CBC or CFB mode, a fixed key and an initial vector. The last ciphertext block is the hash value. A cleverer approach uses the message block as the key, the previous hash value as the input, and the current hash value as the output. The actual hash functions proposed are even more complex. The block size is usually the key length and the size of the hash value is the block size. Since most block algorithms are 64 bits, several schemes are designed around a hash that is twice the block size. Assuming the hash function is correct, the security of the scheme is based on the security of the underlying block function. There are exceptions though. Different cryptanalysis is easier against block functions in hash functions than against block functions used for encryption. The key is known, so several tricks can be applied. Only one right pair is needed for success, and you can generate as much chosen plain text as you want. One useful measure for hash functions based on block cipher is the hash rate, or the number of n-bit message blocks, where n is the block size of the algorithm processed for encryption. The higher the hash rate, the faster the algorithm. Now let us see where the schemes have the hash length equals the block size. Now this is the general hash function where the hash length equals the block size. So here you can observe that you have A, this is the key, and B, which is a text which you are supposed to encrypt. Okay, and then the hash is produced over here. So here h naught is equal to h, okay, where ih is a random initial value, and your hash is got by this is the plain text or the message, so it is encrypted using the A as the key and it is XORed with the C over here. Here A, B and C can either be the previous hash values or the text message or a constant. H naught is some random initial value ih. The message is divided up into block size chunks mi and processed individually. And there is some kind of MD strengthening, perhaps the same padding procedure used in MD5 and SHA. The three different variables can take on one of four possible values. So, there are 64 total schemes of this type. 15 are trivially weak because the result does not depend on one of the inputs. 37 are insecure for more subtle reasons. So we will see the secure schemes in the next slide. So here are the four secure schemes here. So in this first, where in this schemes now the block lengths equal the hash size. So in the first scheme you can observe here, so this is the previous hash value, this is the plain text message. So here the encryption is done using the previous hash value as a key, and the plain text is also given as the output of after the encryption. The message text is also again XORed with that, and you get the hash value. Next, here in the next case you can observe that the previous hash value is initially XORed with the plain text, then that is again encrypted using the hash value itself, and then again that is also taken as the after the encryption also, and the plain text is also taken, and we get the actual hash value over there. In the third case, you can observe that this hash value is used as a key, as well as at the after the encryption also the hash value is taken, and again the plain text is also taken. In the fourth case also you can observe over here the hash value, previous hash value is used in the beginning before the encryption, as well as the key also, and this message is also used after encryption process also. So these four are the here you can observe these four schemes where the it equals the hash value equals the block length. Now we will learn about message authentication codes. A message authentication code or MAC is a key dependent one-way hash function. MACs have the same properties as the one-way hash functions discussed previously, but they also include a key. Only someone with the identical key can verify the hash. They are very useful to provide authenticity without secrecy. MACs can be used to authenticate files between users. They can also be used by a single user to determine if his files have been altered, perhaps by a virus. A user could compute the MAC of his files and store that value in a table. If the user used instead a one-way hash function, then the virus could compute the new hash value after infection and replace the table entry. A virus could not do that with the MAC because the virus does not know the key. An easy way to turn a one-way hash function into a MAC is to encrypt the hash value with a symmetric algorithm. Any MAC can be turned into a one-way hash function by making the key public. We'll see different types of MACs. The first one is the CBC MAC. The simplest way to make a key-dependent one-way hash function is to encrypt a message with a block algorithm in CBC or CFB modes. The hash is the last encrypted block encrypted once more in CBC or CFB modes. Differential cryptanalysis can break this scheme with reduced round DES or FEAL as the underlying block algorithms. The potential security problem with this method is that the receiver must have the key, and that the key allows him to generate messages with same hash value as a given message by decrypting in the reverse direction. Next is the bidirectional MAC. This MAC produces a hash value twice the length of the block algorithm. First, compute the CBC MAC of the message. Then compute the CBC MAC of the message with the blocks in reverse order. The bidirectional MAC value is simply the concatenation of the two. Unfortunately, this construction is insecure. Next is the Johanneman's methods. This MAC is also called a quadratic congruential manipulation detection code QCMDC. First, divide the message into m-bit blocks. Then, H0 is equal to IH, where IH is the secret key. Then the hash value, it is taken as the previous hash plus the message into 2 mod p, where p is a prime less than 2 to the power m minus 1 and plus denotes integer addition. Johanneman suggests n equal to 16 and p equal to 231 minus 1. He also suggested that an additional key be used as HI with the actual message starting at H2. Because of a variety of birthday type attacks discovered in conjunction with Don Coppersmith, Johanneman suggested computing the QCMDC 4 times, using the result of one iteration as the IV for the next iteration, and then concatenating the results to obtain a 128-bit hash value. This was further strengthened by doing the 4 iterations in parallel and cross-linking them. This scheme was broken by Coppersmith. Next is the RIPE MAC. RIPE MAC was invented by Bart Prinell and adopted by the RIPE project. It is based on ISO 9797 and uses DES as a block encryption function. RIPE MAC has two flavors, one using normal DES called RIPE MAC 1 and other using triple DES for even greater security called RIPE MAC 3. RIPE MAC 1 uses 1 DES encryption per 64-bit message block. RIPE MAC 3 uses 3. The algorithm consists of 3 parts. The message is expanded to a length that is a multiple of 64 bits. Next, the expanded message is divided up into 64-bit blocks. A keyed compression function is used to hash these blocks under the control of a secret key into a single block of 64 bits. This is a step that uses either DES or triple DES. Finally, the output of this compression is subjected to another DES-based encryption with a different key, derived from the key used in the compression. Next is the IBC hash. IBC hash is another MAC adopted by the RIPE project. It is interesting because it is probably secure. The chance of successful attack can be quantified. Unfortunately, every message must be hashed with a different key. The chosen level of security puts constraint on the maximum message size that can be hashed, something no other function in this chapter does. Given these considerations, the RIPE report recommends that IBC hash be used only for long, infrequently sent messages. Next is the stream cipher MAC. This MAC scheme uses stream ciphers. A cryptographically secure pseudo-random bit generator demultiplexes the message stream into two substreams. If the output bit of the bit generator Ki is 1, then the current message bit Mi is routed to the first substream. If the Ki is 0, the Mi is routed into the second substream. The substreams are each fed into different LFSR. The output of the MAC is simply the final stages of the shift registers. Unfortunately, this method is not secure against small changes in the message. For example, if you alter the last bit of the message, then only two bits in the corresponding MAC value need to be altered to create a fake MAC. This can be done with a reasonable probability. So you can see the figure over here for the stream cipher MAC. This is the message stream and here is the switch, and these are the two shift registers which have been used. Next is the digital signature algorithm DSA. In August 1991, the National Institute of Standards and Technology proposed the digital signature algorithm for use with their digital signature standard DSS according to the Federal Register. A Federal Information Processing Standards for Digital Signature Standard is being proposed. This proposed standard specifies a public key digital signature algorithm DSA appropriate for federal digital signature applications. The proposed DSS uses a public key to verify to a recipient the integrity of data and identity of the sender of the data. The DSS can also be used by a third party to ascertain the authenticity of a signature and the data associated with it. Let's look at the criticisms against DSA one by one. The first one is DSA cannot be used for encryption or key distribution. It is true, but not the point of the standard. This is a signature standard. NIST should have a standard for public key encryption. Second one is DSA was developed by the NSA and there may be a trapdoor in the algorithm. Third one is DSA is slower than RSA. True, more or less. Signature generation speeds are the same, but signature verification can be 10 to 40 times slower with the DSA. Key generation, however, is faster, but key generation is irrelevant. A user rarely does it. On the other hand, signature verification is the most common operation. The problem with this criticism is that there are many ways to play with the test parameters depending on the results you want. Pre-computations can speed up DSA signature generation but don't always apply. Proponents of RSA use numbers optimized to make their calculations easier. Proponents of DSA use their own optimizations. In any case, computers are getting faster all the time. While there is a speed difference, it will not be noticeable in most applications. Fourth one, RSA is a de facto standard. Here are two examples of this complaint from Robert Follett, the Program Director of Standards at IBM. IBM is concerned that NIST has proposed a standard with a different digital signature scheme rather than adopting the international standard. We have been convinced by users and user organizations that the international standards using RSA will be a prerequisite to the sales of security products in the very near future. Fifth point, the DSA selection process was not public. Sufficient time for an analysis has not been provided. First, NIST claimed that they designed the DSA. Then, they admitted that NSA helped them. Finally, they confirmed that NSA designed the algorithm. Sixth, DSA may infringe on other patents. Seventh, the key size is too small. This was only valid criticism for DSS. The original implementation set the modulus at 512 bits. Since the algorithm gets its security from the difficulty of computing discrete logs in that modulus, this worried most cryptographers. There have since been advances in the problem of calculating discrete logarithms in a finite field, and 512 bits is too short for long-term security. In response to this criticism, NIST made the key size variable from 512 bits to 1024 bits. Not great but better. Security of DSA. At 512 bits, DSA wasn't strong enough for long-term security. At 1024 bits, it is. Regarding the alleged trapdoor in the DSS, we find the term trapdoor somewhat misleading since it implies that the message sent by the DSS are encrypted, and with access via a trapdoor one could somehow decrypt the message without the sender's knowledge. The DSS does not decrypt any data. The real issue is whether the DSS is susceptible to someone forging a signature and therefore discrediting the entire system. We state categorically that the chances of anyone, including NSA, forging a signature with the DSS when it is properly used and implemented is infinitesimally small. Furthermore, the alleged trapdoor vulnerability is true for any public key based authentication system, including RSA. To imply somehow that this only affects the DSS is totally misleading. The issue is one of implementation and how one goes about selecting prime numbers. Additionally, NIST intends to allow for larger modular size up to 1024, which effectively negates the need to even use the prime generation process to avoid weak primes. An additional very important point that is often overlooked is that the DSS, the prime are public and therefore can be subjected to public examination. Not all public key streams provide for this same type of examination. The integrity of any information security system requires attention to proper implementation. With the myriad of vulnerabilities possible given the differences among users, NSA has traditionally insisted on centralized trusted centers as a way to minimize risks to the system. Attacks against K. Each signature requires a new value of K, and that value must be chosen randomly. If Eve ever recovers a key that Alice used to sign a message, perhaps by exploiting some properties of the random number generator that generated K, she can recover Alice's private key X. If Eve ever gets two messages signed using the same key, even if she doesn't know what it is, she can recover X. And with X, Eve can generate undetectable forgeries of Alice's signature. In any implementation of the DSA, a good random number generator is essential to the system's security.